Well, in the mid to late 80s, was a time when our people were beginning to find ways of expressing an independent voice in organisations that were Pākehā, structured along Pākehā lines, organisations which had traditionally marginalised our people and so on. And so there were all sorts of groups formed at that time, Te Waka Awhina, which was Māori working in local government and so on. And we just got involved through the Māori Legal Service because we were the only Māori legal service. But I got involved with Māori nurses because Irihapeti Ramsden was a good friend. And when she developed the idea of cultural safety, as I mentioned in my kōrero this morning, that just caused such political ructions, both within the Nursing Council, NZNO, Ministry of Education, because how dare you talk about the treaty and politics and rangatiratanga in the area of nursing education. And so when she got subpoenaed to appear before the Education Select Committee in Parliament, I went with her. And that was a pretty harrowing ordeal. The committee was all white old men who thought they could browbeat this Māori woman. But she was so intellectually smarter than them, that didn't happen. But when we left that meeting, we talked about trying to formalise something within NZNO. They were very tentative, kōrero, because then she got cancer and died. But she had talked to enough people that the idea took hold. And because there were these other Māori rōpū being established, there were sort of precedents that they could follow. And I was involved in varying degrees with the Runanga ever since. Have enjoyed working with them. When they were first having real difficulties over the pay parity issue for Māori nurses, I remember attending a hui with them, and I suggested that they should go to the United Nations Permanent Forum, Indigenous Rights, because although the United Nations is an organisation of states, so we can't expect it's going to solve Indigenous issues. But I've always believed it has value because it takes the Māori issue internationally, shares it with other Indigenous peoples, but shares it in a United Nations forum where the government has to respond. And so that became part of the work that we did, and then Kerry and others went to New York and so on. And I've just stayed involved because I think, like so many of our groups, although they've become stronger, I mean, just the number at this hui, for example, they're still fighting what are often old problems. Racism, the institutional, what I call gatekeeping of Pākehā organisations, and unions are no different to that than any other organisation. They should be quite different, but they're not. And so it's that hope that I might be able to offer some support, I guess. That's kept me involved, and I like the people, I think they're good people. So, well, I'm always reluctant to give advice, but the first thing I always say is stay brave, because change requires courage. And the second thing I say is be imaginative, because change only comes with imagination. You have to think outside the square, really. And that's why this morning I talked about the criminal justice idea and taking back Māori control over what happens to Māori who hurt others. And that seems a really way out idea. And Pākehā will say there must be only one law for all. But my argument is that before 1840, there was one law for all, and you lot chose to ignore it. So part for me of being brave and being imaginative is often just going out there, putting an idea out there, and people say, oh God, that's unrealistic, oh God, that's not going to happen, But if we just put an idea, say if this is the starting point, and if we put an idea that's just here, then that's a tiny incremental step. And I think our people have waited too long to continue taking tiny incremental steps. So if you put something out there, then I would hope it encourages our people to, yeah, we can actually go there. So instead of just going here, we can go there. And it's like the Mātike Mai stuff. That's out there, It's not about, well, let's have more Māori members of Parliament or whatever. It's out there. But the other reason I like doing that is that in my experience, like this criminal justice report, we worked on it for 5 years. We talked to over 6,000 Māori people. We talked to over 600 Māori who had been in prison or were in prison, and over 300 Māori who had been victims of crime. So I think it's what our people are saying too, because what we tried to do in the report is synthesise what our people have said and then say, where does that take us? So no one had any detail about re-establishing what we've called in the report a tikanga jural order, but it's where their kōrero led. And the reason we take that approach is that there's a small island off the Mahia Peninsula called Waikawa, and it's where the first whare wānanga was established after the Takitimu Waka landed at Mahia. And so it became a very important whare wānanga in the history of Takitimu, the history of Kahungunu. And there's a little inlet on the island, so when people went to go to the wānanga, they would land at this little inlet, which is called whai whakaaro, to follow the thought. And so what we tried to do in the report is whai whakaaro ngā kōrero o tiwi, follow the thought of where the kōrero takes us. And the kōrero didn't take us to here, saying, oh, we should have more Māori police officers, or we should have more Māori judges. If we followed the thought, it took us to here. And so I don't think out here will happen tomorrow, but if it's not out there, then it's not even going to be talked about. So for me, the first idea for change is really, like I said, to be brave and to be imaginative and think of things that you know might not be achievable today, but are the long-term goals, so that our mokopuna then aren't fighting the same battles. And I've always thought that prior to 1840, rangatiratanga necessarily involved the authority to sort out our own issues, the authority to look after our mokopuna, even when they were naughty, you know. Kahungunu never said to Ngāti Parau, we've got this naughty mokopuna, can you sort him out, you know? What we've been forced to do since 1840 is say to the Crown, well, we've got this naughty mokopuna, can you arrest him and take him to court? Well, that's not where I think the treaty leads us. So those are the first two steps. The third step, which is often the hardest, is how do we make that work? And one of the difficulties we have in a colonising society is that we're having to spend so much time reacting to Crown policies. You know, so Kerry was telling me about Peony's kōrero, you know, that he understands the frustration over pay parity and so on. But he hasn't done anything about it. You know, there's a difference between understanding it and actually doing something. And so the next step is always, how do we find or create space so that we're not always reacting to the Crown? We're actually able to say, let's just work out what this means. And that's why I think, say, the wānanga o kawa is so important. It gives that tiny bit of space and time for our people to think about where we should go. So that's the first step, just trying to carve out a safe space so that the nurses can say, okay, we've tried this, we've been to the United Nations, what else can we do? You know? And I always think there are other options, but we need to have the time and space to develop them. That might not sound like a very detailed manifesto for change, but it's the steps I think we need to take. But begin with that big, out there, imaginative thing. So by 2040, which is when I hope we will begin the process of constitutional transformation, I also hope will be the time that part of that debate will be, okay, how do we take care of our own? And so that leads to further discussions about, well, prisons don't work for anyone. Prisons are contrary to the treaty. So what would we have instead of prisons? You know, so when you take that imaginative step out there, it just opens up all these other issues, I think. So I think sometimes, and I tried to touch on it this morning, when we think about where we are at, we tend to forget where most of our people are at. And most of our people are still poor, are still dispossessed, still getting thrown in jail, and so on. And we talk a lot about our people. It's one of the things I love about us. But we always have to be careful, I think, that it includes all of our people. I can remember when the AIDS epidemic started. It was in the 80s, was it? And it was this terrifying disease. And a lot of our people frightened of the disease, but also homophobic. what I used to call missionary-induced homophobia, actually turned away from a lot of our mainly young men who were dying of AIDS. And I got a call from a whānau in Sydney who wanted to bring their boy home, and he was dying of AIDS. And they wanted to take him back to their marae. And the marae wouldn't take him because he had AIDS. So I knew one of the kaumātua, and so I went up and I asked if he'd organise a meeting for me. And they talked a lot about our people, keeping our people safe and so on. And I could understand that. But I remember saying, but he's your mokopuna. He's our people too. Mm. And they finally agreed to let him come. And I've never forgotten that incident, because when he did come and died, and in those days someone died of AIDS, you had to seal the coffin, and so you couldn't. But for those people to take him back and to see that he could only come in this sealed coffin was, I think, a painful but valuable lesson. That no matter what they may have done, what they've suffered or who they are our people. And there has been sometimes, since neoliberalism began, a division between a quite small but very wealthy Māori elite and the rest of our people. And so the rest of our people down here tend to get ignored. And that's not, for me, that's not tūturu, that's not tikuru. So that was just my rather long closing statement. That if we're going to talk about our people, it has to be everyone.